Hi gang, well in our video call this week I got a really good question about the difference between opacity and flow, so that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. I'm recording this with Photoshop, but it is also applicable for Affinity Photo as well. So what I can do then is just start off by showing you quite simply the difference between opacity and flow. Now this option in the options bar will appear when you're using a brush tool. So there's various different brush tools all use this terminology. I've just got the standard brush on and I've got a dark brown foreground colour. Now just having a little look quickly at my other brush settings, and want to start off my demonstration with this very soft brush, so the hardness is all the way down to 0%. Now, by default, your opacity and your flow should be 100%. If you haven't been told otherwise for your tutorial, in the instructions that you're following perhaps, just go to 100% for both and then it should behave as you expect. For example, if I was to draw a brush stroke now on this canvas, it's going to come out with a pretty soft edge. You can see that sort of difference in the edge. It's very blurred, very forgiving, but inside the middle in the center of my brush stroke is the full color, the full complement of that dark brown paint. Now, if I was to reduce the opacity down, as the name suggests, so let me just go to about 50% here. You can type that in if I want to be precise. As the name suggests, this is going to make it translucent. So opacity, as in, do you want it to be completely opaque or not? So if I choose half, I can get a sort of see-through brush stroke. Now, with a very soft brush on, like what I've got, I can also get a very similar effect with a 50% flow. Now flow does come out a little bit darker, but sort of a negligible difference. You still get a see-through result. Now, so in some ways, they're starting to feel like they're interchangeable, but it really is best for you to use the opacity slider with the flow up at 100% unless you've been told otherwise. And let me show you why. If I change my brush to a much harder brush, so I'll bring it up to maybe I'll go all the way, bring it up to 100%. With my flow at 50% still, you start to see this really strange pattern appearing. So let me zoom in on that a little bit. And what we've actually got then is the brush tools, although we don't discuss it much until we go into custom brushes, which is really going to be part of, in my students' case, it's going to be part of the third set of instructional videos that we do for the continuing course when you're getting a bit more advanced. But what we can say about brushes is that this circle emblem at the top is no accident. When we make a brush stroke, it's actually a repeating pattern of this one circle, and you see that with flow. So when you change the flow, what you're actually doing is telling the computer that you want each specific circle to be 50% in our case, so for each specific circle to be kind of half strength. And then when you get them each one half strength, of course it starts to build up. So where these several brush circles overlap, you get this really interesting pattern. So it's kind of cool looking by itself, but it's not normally going to be a natural finish on top of a photograph. So keep the flow change for when you've been specifically asked. The reason that you don't see it in this sort of third squiggle that we did was just because with it being such a soft brush, it still happened, we've still done that, but those rings have merged into one another, so we can't actually tell that it's changed. Now, another time that this makes a difference is when you are doing multiple brush strokes or just the one brush stroke. So let me put my hardness to about 50% for this example. And I'll make my brush a little bit bigger and zoom in a little bit more. So it's been awkward with its sizing. There we go. So let me start off with opacity. Now, opacity, as I'm repeating, should really be the one you change by default. If somebody says to change the sort of strength of the effect, change the opacity, that's the one you want to go for because it has those fewer side effects. So say I wanted to make my opacity 25%. And for years I didn't really need to know the difference between opacity and flow because I would always use several brush strokes. So this problem hadn't really come up for me, but I'll show you what happens if you only use one. So if I use one brush stroke, I've keeping my mouse button down and I'm just moving around in one big long continuous snake. If I do many brush strokes, so if I do several separate ones, then put some other ones on top. So you can see that where they cross over, as you would expect, you get a darker effect because it's actually two separate strokes. So it's two strokes at 25% each. But when I've only done one stroke, even where I crissy-crossed all over myself, it stayed at 25%. So with opacity, you are setting an upper limit. You want it within that single brush stroke, that sort of one time of holding down that mouse button before you release it again and click it a second time, in that one time, maximum that you can put down is 25%. However, flow works differently. So resetting my opacity back to 100 so I can look at these particularly one at a time. If my flow is only a quarter this time, and I do a single brush stroke, yes, you see that sort of slightly scaly effect of the little circles, but more importantly, you see that where the line crosses over itself, it darkens. So this is perfect for if within that first brush stroke you want to be able to have a stronger effect in certain places. So if I really wanted to make this top corner the darkest and blend it out, and I wanted to do it all in one go, I can do. Yeah, so that's really useful. Of course, that wouldn't work with opacity. If I do multiple strokes, you get a very similar effect. So you're just sort of building it up. We've already mentioned that this appears a little bit darker and a little bit stronger than opacity does. We know that we're only getting the rings in the center because the hardness of the brush is kind of in the middle. If I want to get rid of that, you need that soft brush. Another thing that's just worth mentioning, just as an extra sort of silly point really, but just so that you realize, 25% 4 times doesn't give you 100%. So this is a trivial point to make, but if I was to do, I've got just a 24% there, and if I keep building it up, it takes more than 4 layers for it to be as dark as 100%. So it's more forgiving than that. It's actually, yes, you can build it, but it's not sort of only those 4 25s to make 100. You can keep going, and eventually you'll get it as dark, but it takes a lot more. So don't get too pedantic with the maths of this, because that's the way it'll behave in real life. So just to recap then, this is the same for Affinity and for Photoshop, but you've got opacity is the one that you want to use normally. Have that on by default. If you're specifically asked to change the flow and you want to use it to build up an effect at the corners, perhaps of some particular area, then you probably would feel happiest to use your hardness at 0%. So if your hardness is all the way down, you won't run into the same sort of ribbing issue that you get in here, because it's actually a repeating pattern of those circles. So hopefully that makes things a little bit more clear. By default, just change your opacity if at all in any doubt.